Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Good Effort Meg. Today, I thought it would be fun to share with y'all how I got into crocheting and show y'all some of my favorite crochet tools. You know, I'm always curious to find out how people got into their own hobbies, so I thought I would share with y'all, and hopefully you'll find some products or something in this video that might inspire you to pick up crocheting yourself. And maybe you've thought about picking up crocheting and you just didn't know where to start. And as with any hobby, it's very easy to spend a lot of money up front because you don't know what you need and what's the best value for your money. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I guess I'll just start with why I got into crocheting, or how I got into crocheting. When I was in college, I had a friend who, she was an incredible knitter, sewer, and crocheter. She did all the textile arts, and I just thought the things that she made were so amazing, and I really was curious to see if I could learn how to do it myself. And where I was at the time, geographically, there was one weekend where we had a really bad storm come through, and I believe we lost power or something like that. This was many years ago, so I'm trying to recall exactly. And so she had her ball of yarn, and I believe she was working on a sweater that was gonna have the logo for, I wanna say, the Stark family. It was gonna be like their crest on this sweater that she was knitting. And so everybody else was just kind of hanging out, not doing much, but she had an activity that she could do and sit, and she was perfectly content. So I walked over and we were chatting, and she offered to teach me how to knit. So she handed me a ball of yarn and some needles and taught me the basic knit purl, and away I went, and I made a very uneven like white scarf that was way too long, just because all she wanted me to do was just practice and get that muscle memory. As you know by now, I'm an avid gamer, and so like hand-eye coordination was not something that I really had difficulty with, because playing with controllers or mouse and keyboard is just something your brain learns to do, is, hey, hand, do this thing while I'm not looking at it. So I kind of picked it up naturally, but knitting just, it felt really slow to me. I wasn't really getting into it. Like, I was appreciative that she taught me, but I wasn't super duper into it. So she suggested that I try crocheting. She said crocheting is a lot faster and you could pick it up relatively easily. I was like, okay. So I started crocheting. I worked on some hats. They never came out in a way that like I was happy with, so I never wore them. And I ended up spending way too much money on yarn that I had no business buying because I didn't know what I was doing. And then I came across these figurines called amigurumis. I believe that pronunciation is correct. And those are like the Pokemon that I'm making. Those are amigurumis. It's like a Japanese style of crochet that makes little dolls. And you can find them anywhere. People love making them, and you can make characters, you can make actual dolls, you can make animals, anything you want. And I just thought they were the most adorable things ever. And so I decided that one year for Christmas, I was going to make my sister the starter Pokemon. And so that was like my, regardless of how hard this is, I'm going to make this for her for Christmas. And so yeah, so I just dove right in. I watched a ton of videos, and I finally got the hang of it. I think the hardest thing for me to learn was tension. So you'll hear that a lot, and tension is just when you're holding the yarn with one hand, and you're literally just trying to keep the yarn at a consistent tension, so that way as you're hooking the yarn, you get consistent size in your stitches. Makes sense. Easier said than done. So it took me a lot of practice to get consistent with that. And really ever since then, I mean, I fell in love with it. I was like, wow, this is really amazing. Another thing that I really loved about crochet that I didn't learn about until after the fact is that you can't machine make crochet items. There are machines out there that can knit items. So like when you go to a store and you find a knitted sweater, that was probably made on a machine because there's the technology to do that. That doesn't exist for crochet. So everything that you find in a store that's crocheted is handmade. Now, keeping in mind then that at that price point, you know, think about like the people that are making these things, right? I won't get into all that, but it struck a chord with me because I was like, wow, so everything that I make that's crocheted can't be duplicated by a machine. And to me, that just makes it an even more special gift and skill. And I love, like, ever since I was a kid, I always loved making people gifts. And I would learn anything from sculpting to pottery to woodworking to carving to sewing. I mean, that's the majority of the reason why I learned these skills that I have, is because I love making things for people, because anybody can go and buy something off of a shelf, and there are times where I think that's perfectly appropriate, but I just love adding my own touch to things. And you know, maybe there's something out there that I'm like, you know, I really love this item, but I wish it could be done in this color. And having control over those decisions is huge. And so, yeah, so that's really how I ended up crocheting, and I've made some of my favorite things. I think this year is going to be a big year for me with crochet, because I'm going to try to make my first like larger wearables. I typically only make like the amigurumis, or I'll make hats for people. I make baby blankets for friends who are expecting. But I kind of want to try to make my own like cardigan or something. I don't typically make things for myself. So that'll be an interesting prospect. But yeah, so I think that's enough about like kind of how I got into crochet and why crochet kind of stuck with me. And so let's move on, and I'm going to show you guys some of my very favorite crochet tools, and I'll show you the things that are definitely worth the money and things that maybe after you get a little experience then you can upgrade to these things, but definitely not things you have to buy right now. So let's move on to that. So my very first set of crochet hooks that I bought, I think I bought them from a Michael's and had a coupon or something, but I didn't want to spend too much money on the crochet hooks because I just wanted something to get me started, but I also wanted to have varying sizes because I had no idea what I was going to be making or what I would want to make. So I was like, let me just get like an array of sizes. So these are actually the very first crochet hooks that I bought, and they're not ergonomic. There's nothing really special about them. I think I paid maybe $20 or something like that for these, so very inexpensive at the time. I don't know how much these go for now. I'll try to leave a link in my description of all the things that I show here, but the very first crochet stuff that I bought roughly 6-7 years ago, so prices have changed. So anything that I say that's incorrect, I'll be sure to update in the description. But yeah, so these are the very first crochet hooks that I bought. I still use them to this day. They're not the most comfortable. When I work on bigger projects, these aren't the best for me. I have a lot of early stage, like kind of carpal tunnel. I get ganglion cysts in my wrists from volleyball that I used to play, and just like the repetitive motion. So I try to find things that are ergonomic for my hand, but these are definitely perfect for smaller projects like the amigurumis. I can definitely get through with those. Yeah, so these are tried and true They're always gonna work, and I've never had any issues with these. So these are the first ones I said. So the next set of crochet hooks that I bought were this set of ergonomic crochet hooks. And these are not the Clover brand ergonomic crochet hooks. I, at the time, just wasn't in a place where I could really put the money into the Clover. I have heard the Clovers are really nice, but these were actually gifted to me in a set that my aunt got me. She also crochets, and she really liked them. Now, I will say, these are great ergonomic hooks when you first get them. But over time, I found that, especially the more frequently used sizes that I use, the like rubber, like you could even see like the rubber piece here starts sliding off. Now, I don't know if that's because I have a death grip on my crochet hook, or if it's just a design feature, or what, because it could very much be my own fault. But I just found, for me, it was very annoying that I would do a couple of stitches, the rubber piece would be like here, so then I would have to stop, I would have to push the rubber piece on, and then I would keep going. So I've kind of gone away from using these as much and went back to my original hooks, just because they're less annoying to work with. But would recommend these, like if you need a ergonomic hook at a decent price, this is good. And these actually came in like this really neat little roll-up case, and again, I'll link this down below. And this is actually what I carry all my hooks in. So it's super handy from that aspect. So my absolute favorite crochet hook to use, but also the most expensive crochet hook that I own, is this guy right here. So this is a Furls brand crochet hook, and these puppies go for like 30 upwards per hook. So they're very expensive, but I bought this one as a treat for myself. And I only bought this one because I didn't want to drop a bunch of money on a hook if, you know, like on a whole set, if I wasn't going to like it. But this is by far, for me personally, the most comfortable hook to use. I plan on getting more of these in the future, but I'll probably only buy like one or two at a time and just like build my setup slowly that way. Just because it's hard to justify that much for a single hook for me personally, but absolutely worth the money. And for this hook and this company, I definitely wanted to share this story. So when I initially bought my hook, I was making a purse for my mom as a Mother's Day gift, and I'll actually post a picture of what it looked like. And it wasn't anything super complicated. It wasn't anything that I did differently than, or like use this hook differently than I would have my other hooks. But actually what ended up happening was there was like a stress fracture. So this is actually the first hook that I bought. And you can see here that it almost had like a twisting and pulling stress here, and it was almost like this kind of weak aluminum. And initially when I got the hook, like, I don't know if you can tell a difference, but this one, the base and the hook, there's no gap there. This one, when I first got it, there was a slight gap. So I don't know if it was like a manufacturing error or something like that, but I was super upset when it broke. And I reached out to the company and their customer service. I sent them pictures. I, had my receipt showing I'd only bought the hook like 3 months prior to, and things like that. And, telling them that, I was super happy with the product, when it was working, but when it snapped in half, I was a little concerned. Let me tell you, This company did not hesitate to make things right. They actually ended up refunding me the amount that I paid for this, and then they sent me a new hook. And to me, that speaks volumes about a company. Especially in today's world where it's oftentimes you feel almost like preyed upon as a consumer by different policies and things that companies put in place. Like, that act alone, like $30 doesn't seem like a lot of money to some people, especially a huge successful company. But to me, like, them doing that, they guaranteed themselves like a customer for life, essentially, because they made things right. They didn't, you know, try to make it a difficult process for me. They didn't blame me for breaking the hook. They said, hey, totally understand, it definitely should not have broken regardless of what happened. So we're gonna make things right. And so I definitely wanted to share that, just because at this price point for a hook, I think that customer service definitely comes and plays a part. So, but if you're new to crocheting, hold off on these guys. They're pretty and they're weighted really well. Like, they're very balanced, but you don't need it. Start with the cheap ones until you get the hang of it. Find out if you love the hobby or not yet. But yeah, so I wanted to share that story. So the next thing you're gonna need for crocheting is a set of stitch markers. Now, there's tons of different types of stitch markers that you can get, and people get real crazy with them, and I think it's super cute. People like sell like custom ones on Etsy and stuff, but I think I started off with these guys right here. So they're just little, almost like rubber material, and they actually came with a kit, that like a starter kit that I bought. And I still use these time to time, just because they're really nice, because they're so flexible that depending on the project you're using, that's what you want, is something flexible, but very inexpensive. I would say my most frequently used stitch marker are actually these guys. So these are plastic, and the thing I like about these that I don't love about these is, I don't know if you can see, but they kind of have this little nub on them to lock it in. And that oftentimes makes it difficult to because if you're working with one hand, it's hard to you know what I'm saying, get it under the stitch. And so this one's really nice because it's smooth, it's a rounded edge, and it does its job. It's hard, so it's not gonna, fall off or anything like that. So these are really nice, and these are also really inexpensive. And let's just say you are really just trying to, you're borrowing a hook, you don't want to put any money into the project or into the hobby yet. Paper clips. I use these all the time. Paper clips, bobby pins. I mean, very hard pressed to find these, not lying around the house or whatnot. So, but stitch markers are a must. That holds your stitch if you need a place to stop for the night. It also is really good if you're working in the round to track where you're starting and your ending stitches. So get yourself something. Now let's say you are wanting to do and jump into amigurumi like I did. Then one of the things you're definitely going to need is a set of safety eyes. Now, one of the mistakes that I made, and I still have these and I've never used them, was I actually ended up buying a set of assorted colors safety eyes. So I have these cat eyes, never used them. Be mindful, check your prices. So I have found that in a lot of craft stores like Joann's and Michael's, they sell safety eyes and they're perfectly fine. But for a small set of 10 safety eyes, you can buy yourself a ton of these on Amazon or a local craft store or something like that. So I'm not going to say that it's always cheaper to buy it online, because I have found where sometimes it's cheaper to go to those stores if you have like a coupon or something like that. So just do your research before you decide. But I will say the ones that I get the most use out of are just the plain black ones. But I will say the thing that I struggled with was what size eyes to get. So if you watched my Squirtle and Bulbasaur video, technically those would have come out to roughly the same size had the yarn been the same size. And they didn't, because the yarn that I used on Bulbasaur was much smaller than the yarn that I used on Squirtle. And so I didn't want to use the same size eyes on them. So investing in something like this, if you get comfortable with making amigurumis and you want to stick to making them, buying something like this is awesome. This has so many different size eyeballs, and there's actually little noses and stuff in here, but this is definitely worth it in my opinion to get something like this in like a little tackle box where they're organized. Otherwise, just buy what you need when you need it. I'm gonna come back to that phrase. And the very last thing you're gonna need if you want to make dolls or amigurumis or anything like that is you're gonna wanna buy some Polyfil. This is relatively inexpensive. You can buy bulk bags, but if you're just starting out, I would just buy a small bag, and a little goes a long way, and you can always mix it with your yarn scraps, which is what I do, and that can save you money there as well. So now we're to the creme de la creme. With any knitting or crochet project, you're obviously going to need yarn. And one of the mistakes that I made when I first started is I wanted the best quality yarn because I was making a gift for my sister. Of course I want her to have the best. But I found that I knew very little about the different textiles, the different stretch of textiles, whether or not they would pill or they'd have like little fuzzies come off of it. I knew none of that. So I ended up spending way too much money on yarn that I didn't really like working with. And I still have a lot of it. So my recommendation would be to start with an inexpensive yarn. Yes, it's not going to be fancy, but it's important to get a feel for the types of yarn that you enjoy working with. And there's tons out there. There's a ton of different size yarns. I'm still personally learning about the sizing of yarns. It's just not something that is intuitive to myself. But we're learning. It's always a learning process. But you can get, like, for instance, this is a cotton yarn, and this is what I used on Bulbasaur, and there is no stretch in this. And this was one of the first yarns that I bought, which is why there's still so much of it. And I found that this hurt to work with at the time because I was still learning how to do tension, that I was literally cutting off blood to the ends of my fingers. So I just was like, it was a miserable experience, and it almost made me not want to continue on crocheting. So one of the things I would recommend is when you're picking out your project, you know, when you go to the fabric store or to the craft store, test the stretch of your yarn. If there's no stretch, your fingers are in for a workout. Especially if you're new and you're trying to learn. I'm not saying find something that's like the equivalent of like an elastic stretch, but find something that gives a little bit. It'll be a little bit more of a comfortable journey for yourself. So yeah, so I would definitely recommend that. And picking like neutral colors, you know, something that you can use on multiple projects. So I personally have promised Anthony that I wouldn't buy yarn unless it was for a specific project or I went through my stash first. I have one like plastic bin of yarn, and I told them I would never exceed that amount until I used up what was in there or I got rid of it, but my yarn was not going to exceed that plastic bin, and I've kept to that. And that part's been good. So from a storage perspective, that's awesome. But I definitely see how easy it would be to, you know, walk into a store and find this beautiful yarn and not be tempted to buy it. I think I've only ever impulse yarn once, but that was because it was being discontinued and it was 80% off, and I had a project in mind immediately when I saw it. So I think that's the only time I've ever impulse bought yarn. But everything else was for a specific project. So I'll say like probably the last two things that you are gonna need for crocheting is a tapestry needle. So what makes this different than a regular needle, which I can actually grab a regular needle to show you the difference. So this is a regular sewing needle, so you can see how thin this is, and this is a tapestry needle. So this is specifically for working with yarn, and you're gonna want this regardless of the project you're working on. This is not something that is specifically used for amigurumi. You're gonna need this for weaving in ends of yarn, for blankets, for clothing, for hats, anything. So you're definitely gonna wanna pick up a couple of these. These are the same ones that I bought in the kit when I first started crocheting. And there's nothing special about them, so like I don't think spending a ton of money on like super unique or nice tapestry needles makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, you do you, but if you're just starting out, just buying a set of like 2 or 3 of these is perfectly fine, and just keep them in like a bag or something so you don't lose them. And the last thing that you're definitely going to need when crocheting is a pair of scissors. So you don't have to have a pair of scissors that's specifically for crocheting. This was something that I bought when, again, I just found that, hey, I love crocheting. This is something that I'm probably going to do for the rest of my life. So when I found this pair, these are perfect because when I'm traveling or something, I carry these in like a really small bag. Actually, I can show you. So when I travel and I have a project that I'm working on, I actually carry my things in here. So this will have the hooks that I need for the project that I'm working on. I can put my scissors in here, my stitch markers, and my tapestry needles, and it's all nice in here. But a regular pair of scissors like won't fit into a nice flat bag like this. So having these scissors, it's great. Now for another bonus item that you definitely don't need for starting out with crocheting, but it's super nice, is a yarn ball. So I used to see these like everywhere when I first started out crocheting, and mainly I just thought they were really pretty and unique, but I didn't really see the value of having one. And then I got one as a gift and I was like, holy crap, I can't live without this thing. This thing goes everywhere with me. You can actually see, unfortunately this actually got broken in a move, and so I bought some of that, I think it was like Flex Seal, and glued her back on, and I tried to blend in the color as best I could because I wasn't gonna live without this baby. So very handy if you crochet a lot. A lot of knitters use these as well. So if you're not sure which of the two that you're gonna get into, this is something that kind of crosses those lines. So, but if you're feeling fancy, get yourself a nice yarn bowl. And the last thing I would say you don't need, but is a definite quality of life improvement when you get into crocheting, is a yarn winder. And what a yarn winder will do is, if you're familiar with like the general shape of a skein, I've heard people say skein, not skin, skein. I say skein. I don't know if that's right or not. We'll Google that. But the particular shape of like a skein of yarn is like almost like a potato shape. And that's not great for storage. It just doesn't stack well. And so a yarn winder will turn your yarn into like these super manageable little, they call them cakes. and they're nice and neat. They're great to work with. So when you're working on a project, they unwind in an even way, so you know your yarn's not going to get tangled as you're working on it. So that's something you definitely don't need, but you can get them for relatively cheap. I think the one I got for like $20 or $30, and it was a Christmas present that I bought myself a couple years back. And that was really, I bought it because that plastic bin I was talking about was starting to get overflowed, and I was like, how can I fit more yarn in there? And buying a yarn winder helped a lot with that. So I would recommend that later on in your textile journey. Well, I hope like this helped y'all kind of understand why I got into crocheting, why I love crocheting, and if you were looking into getting into crocheting, I hope that these products that I told you about can help you get started. And then maybe if you're in the intermediate range and we're on the fence about a particular product that I mentioned here, then maybe that can help you make a decision. But let me know if there's any particular products that you're curious if they're worth it or not. I'm not gonna say that I know, I'm not the end all be all of crochet industry at all. But I will say that I am a very frugal person. I do a pretty decent like cost benefit analysis before I buy something. I hope I can help you with that. But yeah, I hope this video was informative. I hope it helped you in some way or inspired you. And if you want to see some of my crochet videos, go check out my playlist, Crochet Cafe. And yeah, and if you want to see more content like this, let me know what you would like to see, and don't forget to subscribe so you can be in the know when I put out new content every week. And yeah, that's about it. So I guess I'll see you guys in the next video.